Christianity's rise. From Judean roots to global faith, the emergence of Christianity, its beginnings and its development into one of the most significant religions in world history, can be interpreted as a deeply rooted socio-cultural and historical transformation that took shape amidst the turmoil of first-century Judea. Initially forming as a minor Jewish group, Christianity gradually transformed over hundreds of years into a widespread faith that would alter the ancient world's cultural and political landscape and continue to do so long afterward. While often studied through a spiritual or theological perspective, its emergence is equally fascinating as a reflection of humanity's struggle with authority, identity, and existential meaning. First-century Judea, a Roman-controlled province, was a region filled with complexity and tension. The Jewish community, subject to Roman taxation and administration, often found itself in conflict with foreign governance that clashed with their spiritual customs and longing for sovereignty. A central tenet of Jewish identity was the prophesied arrival of a Messiah, a deliverer foretold in sacred texts who would rescue them from subjugation. This messianic hope coexisted with widespread social upheaval, as various groups either resisted Roman dominance or tried to accommodate it. Within Judaism itself, diverse factions held differing visions. The Pharisees promoted meticulous obedience to religious law. The Sadducees maintained control of temple rituals. The Zealots endorsed armed revolt, and the Essenes chose isolation and ascetic purity. These divisions highlighted the range of responses to their era's challenges. Amid this fragmented religious and political setting emerged Jesus of Nazareth, a compelling speaker and teacher. His existence, his principles, and the movement that arose from him ignited one of humanity's most impactful cultural shifts. Though much of Jesus' biography remains debated, evidence indicates that he was a Jewish man from Galilee living during a time of intense political instability. His messages, preserved in the Gospels and other early Christian documents, emphasized love, mercy, and modesty. He also proclaimed the arrival of the kingdom of God, a phrase many interpreted as a spiritual and ethical awakening rather than a political rebellion. Jesus' teachings stood out due to their inclusiveness. He engaged with marginalized individuals such as sex workers, corrupt tax agents, and the diseased, and confronted prevailing social stratification. This inclusivity attracted many dissatisfied with the formalism of Jewish legalism and the oppression of Roman rule. However, as his influence expanded, both religious authorities and Roman officials grew wary, viewing him as a possible agitator of social instability. Around 30 CE, Jesus was executed by crucifixion, a Roman punishment reserved for rebels and lawbreakers. Crucifixion wasn't just a death sentence, it served as a public deterrent meant to shame and warn others. Historically, Jesus' crucifixion should have brought an end to his movement, as had occurred with other supposed messianic claimants. Yet what happened afterward was extraordinary. Jesus' followers declared that he had risen from the dead, an event they called the resurrection. Regardless of one's interpretation of this claim, it became the cornerstone of Christianity. It elevated Jesus from a regional prophet to a divinely significant figure and motivated his disciples to carry his message across lands and cultures. His earliest adherents, later known as Christians, were initially a minority within Judaism. They believed that Jesus fulfilled ancient prophecies, but reframed the concept of salvation as something meant for all people, not just the Jewish community. This radical shift broadened Christianity's appeal. A crucial player in this expansion was Paul of Tarsus, a former Pharisee who converted after an intense spiritual encounter he believed was a vision of Jesus. Paul would become one of Christianity's most influential missionaries and thinkers, traveling widely throughout the Roman world to establish new congregations. His epistles, later integrated into the New Testament, outline theological principles that help define and systematize the religion. Christianity quickly gained traction, especially among the urban poor in Roman cities. Its doctrines struck a chord with the disenfranchised, offering them hope, belonging, and moral direction. Early Christian groups were known for their communal care systems, particularly for the sick and impoverished, which contrasted sharply with the often impersonal and rigid Roman social order. Initially, Roman officials regarded Christianity with distrust. The Christians' refusal to worship Roman deities or the emperor was interpreted as subversive. As a result, periodic crackdowns attempted to stifle the movement. Yet these persecutions often had unintended consequences. The martyrs, those who were publicly executed for refusing to recant their beliefs, became symbols of bravery and steadfast faith, which in turn inspired new followers. The true turning point came in the 4th century during the reign of Emperor Constantine. As historical records suggest, Constantine experienced a divine vision before a decisive military conflict. In 313 CE, he issued the Edict of Milan, which granted Christianity legal status and ended systematic persecutions. By endorsing Christianity, Constantine acknowledged its growing societal influence and leveraged it to consolidate power within the empire. In 380 CE, Emperor Theodosius declared Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. In fewer than 400 years, a once persecuted sect from a provincial corner of the empire had become its religious centerpiece. This fusion of Christian faith with Roman politics and traditions initiated a deep and lasting transformation, both for the faith itself and for the empire at large. The ascent of Christianity redefined ancient society. It introduced new perspectives on personal worth, empathy, and ethical leadership, all of which left a lasting imprint on Western civilization. In the Middle Ages, the Christian Church became a foundational institution in Europe. It preserved intellectual traditions, inspired art and philosophy, and acted as a cohesive force during periods of political disunity. Viewed from a sociological standpoint, Christianity's success lies in its flexibility and broad resonance. Its teachings were adaptable across diverse cultures, and its organizational model enabled it to persist through shifting political regimes. Moreover, its capacity to offer purpose and solidarity in an unpredictable world gave it an enduring strength unmatched by many other movements. In essence, Christianity's journey is not solely a religious chronicle, it's a deeply human one. It is the story of how beliefs, structures, and social forces combine to initiate historical change. By analyzing its development through historical and sociological contexts, we gain greater insight into how this once obscure sect evolved into a pillar of global civilization. Enlightenment in the Islamic world, a legacy of innovation and knowledge. The era known as the Islamic Golden Age, lasting approximately from the 8th to the 14th century, represents one of history's most remarkable periods of scholarly, scientific, and cultural achievement. During these centuries, the Islamic world emerged as a dynamic epicenter of intellectual advancement, merging wisdom from a variety of ancient civilizations and forging a legacy that would shape the future of global development. From transformative medical breakthroughs to pioneering work in mathematics, philosophy, and the arts, this flourishing period laid the intellectual groundwork for the later Renaissance in Europe. The roots of the Islamic Golden Age can be traced to the Abbasid Caliphate, especially under the leadership of enlightened rulers such as Al-Mansur and Al-Ma'mun, who elevated Baghdad into a beacon of knowledge and culture. At the heart of this scholarly awakening stood the legendary House of Wisdom, an iconic academy and repository of texts in Baghdad, where intellectuals from all parts of the known world convened to interpret, analyze, and build upon the ancient knowledge of civilizations such as the Greeks, Persians, Indians, and Egyptians. Unlike many regimes that pursued dominance solely through military power, the Abbasid caliphs viewed intellectual enrichment as a potent form of influence. Their investment in learning was deeply intertwined with Islamic principles that held the pursuit of knowledge as a sacred obligation. The Quran and the teachings of Prophet Muhammad placed high value on education and inquiry, fueling an era of intense academic enthusiasm and discovery. Cities such as Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba evolved into thriving hubs of learning, drawing scholars, scientists, and philosophers from across the Islamic world and beyond. During this illustrious age, medicine witnessed revolutionary progress. Innovators like Al-Razi, referred to as Razis in the West, transformed medical practices by stressing empirical observation and accurate diagnosis. His expansive medical compendium, Al-Hawi, became an essential reference for both the Islamic realm and medieval Europe. Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, further elevated medical science through his seminal work, The Canon of Medicine. This encyclopedic text harmonized medical traditions from Greek, Roman, and Islamic sources, delving into subjects like anatomy, pharmacology, and treatment protocols. It introduced novel diagnostic tools and remained a central educational resource in European medical schools for generations, greatly influencing Renaissance medicine. The realm of mathematics also advanced significantly during this period. Scholars contributed foundational knowledge that remains relevant today. Al-Khwarizmi, often credited as the father of algebra, introduced essential concepts in his seminal work Kitab al-Jabr, from which the term algebra originates. He also championed the use of the decimal system and the number zero, concepts that are indispensable in modern mathematics and engineering. Astronomy, closely linked to mathematical development, also soared during this time. Thinkers such as al-Battani improved trigonometric methods and enhanced the accuracy of celestial calculations, vital for navigation and Islamic rituals like determining the Qibla, direction of Mecca. Al-Biruni made an extraordinarily precise estimate of the Earth's circumference, long before European seafarers verified it. Meanwhile, al-Sufi's planetary models anticipated Copernicus's later heliocentric framework. Philosophy experienced a renaissance as Islamic intellectuals engaged deeply with classical Greek philosophy, particularly the ideas of Plato and Aristotle. Thinkers like Al-Kindi, Ibn Arabi, and Ibn Rushd, Averroes, sought to harmonize reason with faith, wrestling with profound issues such as the essence of being, moral philosophy, and cosmology. Ibn Rushd became instrumental in reintroducing Aristotle's thought to Europe, influencing Western philosophers such as Thomas Aquinas and shaping medieval scholasticism. Philosophers of the Islamic Golden Age didn't merely preserve inherited ideas, they expanded upon them. They challenged dogmas, proposed new interpretations, and emphasized critical reasoning and evidence-based inquiry. This intellectual openness helped cultivate a culture of knowledge that bridged religious, linguistic, and geographic divides. A defining accomplishment of this era was the preservation and expansion of ancient knowledge. At a time when the classical heritage of Greece and Rome risked vanishing, Islamic scholars translated critical works by figures like Euclid, Galen, and Hippocrates into Arabic. These translations weren't passive. They were accompanied by commentaries, critiques, and original insights, forming a rich intellectual tradition that would later re-enter Europe via Latin translations. Beyond science and philosophy, this vibrant age also nurtured literary and poetic creativity. Masterpieces such as 1001 Nights wove together moral reflection with imaginative storytelling. Persian poets like Rumi composed profound verses about love, unity, and divine connection, writings that continue to move readers around the globe. The influence of the Islamic Golden Age was not limited to Islamic lands. Through Al-Andalus, Islamic Spain, particularly the city of Cordoba, and through scholarly institutions such as the Toledo School of Translators, Arabic texts were rendered into Latin. This process sparked a resurgence of intellectual energy in Europe and introduced scholars there to scientific methods, mathematical theories, and philosophical concepts first developed or refined in the Islamic world. These texts and ideas laid a critical foundation for the European Renaissance. Thinkers like Leonardo da Vinci and Copernicus, although separated by centuries, indirectly benefited from the discoveries and intellectual traditions passed down by Islamic scholars. The scientific revolution in Europe owes a substantial debt to this interwoven legacy of knowledge. The decline of this intellectual golden era began in the 14th century, driven by political instability, Mongol invasions, and internal discord. The Mongol sack of Baghdad in 1258 inflicted a catastrophic blow to the cultural and academic vitality of the region. Yet the contributions of the Islamic Golden Age endured, shaping developments in science, medicine, and thought for hundreds of years to follow. This chapter of history remains a powerful reminder of what can be achieved through curiosity, cooperation, and cultural exchange. It stands as a testament to the limitless potential of human intellect when learning and creativity are nurtured and celebrated. The extraordinary accomplishments of this age continue to enlighten us, offering a timeless example of how civilization advances when it embraces knowledge across borders. Byzantium, unveiled. 1,000 years of empire, faith, and legacy. Often overshadowed by the grandeur of ancient Rome, the Byzantine Empire was, in truth, one of history's most resilient and impactful civilizations. Spanning more than a millennium, from 330 CE, when Emperor Constantine the Great founded Constantinople as the capital, to its eventual fall in 1453 to the Ottomans, Byzantium stood as a symbol of endurance, strategic brilliance, and cultural richness. Its tale is marked by tactical innovation, spiritual transformation, and global significance, leaving deep imprints on both the ancient and modern worlds. At the heart of the empire lay Constantinople, majestically situated on the Bosporus Strait, a geographic junction linking Europe and Asia. This advantageous location turned the city into a vital nexus for trade and cross-cultural exchange, controlling the essential commercial routes connecting the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. Constantinople flourished as a cosmopolitan metropolis, its markets teeming with exotic goods from afar, and its wealth magnified through trade tariffs. Defended by massive, nearly indestructible walls, the city withstood countless sieges and remained unconquered for centuries. For nearly 1,000 years, it sparkled as the crown jewel of Byzantium, crowned by the architectural marvel of the Hagia Sophia. With its breathtaking dome and intricate mosaics, this monument stood not only as a masterpiece of engineering, but also as a powerful emblem of Byzantine ingenuity and Orthodox faith. Among the defining aspects of Byzantine identity was its pivotal role in the development of Christianity. In the 4th century, Emperor Constantine legitimized the religion through the Edict of Milan, laying the groundwork for Christianity's rise as the empire's official faith. Byzantium soon became the spiritual center of Eastern Orthodox Christianity, evolving independently from the Western Roman Church. The formal separation occurred in 1054 during the Great Schism, dividing Eastern Orthodoxy from Roman Catholicism and cementing Byzantium's distinct religious character. This faith permeated every aspect of Byzantine culture. Monasticism flourished, especially in sanctuaries like Mount Athos, which emerged as centers of devotion and scholarship. Byzantine icons, highly stylized, symbolic religious images, were venerated as sacred conduits to the divine. Adorned in radiant gold and vivid hues, these icons illustrated the Byzantine focus on transcendence, mysticism, and spiritual depth. A defining golden age came under the rule of Emperor Justinian I, 527 to 565 CE. His vision of restoring the Roman Empire led to a series of military campaigns under the strategic command of General Belisarius, briefly reclaiming territories in North Africa, Italy, and Spain. Though these gains were temporary, they symbolized a fleeting reawakening of Roman supremacy. Yet Justinian's most lasting contribution was not in war, but in law. His Corpus Juris Civilis, the body of civil law, systematically compiled and refined centuries of Roman legal traditions. This legal codex became the backbone of Byzantine law and deeply influenced legal systems throughout Europe, shaping modern civil law to this day. Justinian also left a lasting legacy in architecture. The awe-inspiring Hagia Sophia, commissioned during his reign, stood as a monument to Byzantine architectural mastery. Its soaring dome, which seemed to defy gravity, left visitors speechless, embodying the empire's artistic and technical brilliance. The Byzantine Empire was a cultural crossroads, blending Greco-Roman heritage with Eastern elements to forge a distinctive identity. Its artistic expression, particularly its luminous mosaics and spiritual iconography, emphasized not realism but divine presence. While Western art often pursued naturalistic representation, Byzantine artists aimed to evoke sacred mystery and metaphysical truth. Intellectual life also thrived in Byzantium. Scholars diligently preserved and expanded upon the works of classical thinkers like Aristotle and Plato. These texts, protected during a time of great upheaval in Western Europe, were later transmitted to the Islamic world and eventually reintroduced to Europe, contributing to the Renaissance and helping shape the trajectory of modern intellectual development. The empire's longevity was not by accident. It was sustained through military innovation and diplomatic skill. One of Byzantium's most fearsome military tools was Greek fire, a combustible weapon that could ignite even on water, giving Byzantine fleets a critical advantage at sea. Its military might was bolstered by elite forces like the Varangian Guard, fierce warriors of Norse and Anglo-Saxon descent who were fiercely loyal and highly disciplined. Equally vital was the empire's diplomatic prowess. Byzantine rulers deftly maneuvered through complex geopolitical landscapes, forming strategic alliances, arranging political marriages, and employing shrewd negotiations to avoid unnecessary wars. This deft balance of force and diplomacy allowed the empire to endure for centuries, even as Western Europe splintered into feudal states. Nonetheless, the empire was not immune to catastrophe. One of its most devastating blows came during the Fourth Crusade in 1204. Though initially intended to reclaim the Holy Land, the Crusaders redirected their assault toward Constantinople, sacking the city and plundering its wealth. For decades, Latin rulers occupied the city, weakening the Byzantine state beyond recovery. By the 14th century, the Ottoman Turks had risen as a formidable power, gradually conquering Byzantine territories. In 1453, Sultan Mehmed II launched a decisive siege of Constantinople. Despite determined resistance, the city fell, marking the end of the Byzantine Empire. The fall of Constantinople was a defining moment in world history, signaling the close of the medieval era and heralding the ascendance of the Ottoman Empire. Yet, even in defeat, Byzantium's legacy endured. Its preservation of classical knowledge laid the intellectual groundwork for the European Renaissance. Its spiritual traditions continue to shape the practices of Orthodox Christian nations such as Greece, Russia, and Serbia. Its architectural wonders and artistic treasures, most notably its domed churches and radiant mosaics, remain celebrated achievements of human creativity. The Byzantine Empire was more than a successor to Rome or a bridge between eras. It was a unique civilization that crafted its own path by synthesizing East and West into a singular cultural fabric. Its history is one of adaptation, resilience, and enduring influence, a shining reminder of the power of culture, intellect, and faith. Long after its fall, the spirit of Byzantium continues to illuminate the corridors of history. Foundations of feudalism, Europe's medieval web of power and obligation. In medieval Europe, feudalism formed the bedrock of society, a vast and intricate system of mutual reliance that governed land ownership, authority, and daily life for generations. It developed in the aftermath of the Roman Empire's disintegration, as Europe splintered into countless domains led by local chieftains and military rulers. With no centralized government in place, survival hinged on interwoven commitments between social classes, an elaborate human chain linking monarchs, nobles, warriors, and laborers, each fulfilling distinct yet indispensable roles. Picture a sprawling puzzle, every piece essential, yet shaped by a unique function. After Rome's collapse in the 5th century, Europe was gripped by disorder. The absence of Roman stability gave rise to lawlessness, economic turmoil, and continual external threats. Local rulers, many of whom commanded private armies, took charge of fragmented regions, offering safety in return for loyalty. This practice gradually formalized into the feudal structure. In this system, land, referred to as a fief, became the cornerstone of power. Kings or high-ranking lords granted land to their subordinates in return for pledged service and allegiance. Unlike modern property rights, feudal landholding was conditional, loaned rather than owned outright, and this relationship based on land for service formed the societal core of the Middle Ages. Feudal society took the shape of a hierarchy resembling a pyramid. At its peak sat the king, who held theoretical ownership over all land. Directly beneath him were mighty lords and barons, entrusted with vast tracts of territory in exchange for their fealty. These lords, in turn, allotted sections of land to knights, military retainers who promised to defend their lords' domains. At the base were peasants and serfs, whose labor sustained the entire structure. This societal order was upheld by a system of reciprocal duties. The king provided authority and protection to his lords, the lords offered knights to serve in battle, and the peasants cultivated the land to support all tiers above them. The everyday existence of a serf, the backbone of this system, was extremely difficult. Though not slaves, serfs were legally bound to their lord's estate and could not depart without permission. From dawn to dusk, they worked the fields, plowing, sowing, and harvesting. In return, they were granted shelter and protection from raiders and invaders, an essential guarantee in an age marred by violence. Serfs owed a share of their harvest to their lords, performed extra duties on the lord's private lands, and often paid fees to access communal resources like grain mills and baking ovens. Despite their hardship, the system offered serfs a degree of order and safety in an otherwise perilous world. Above the serfs were the knights, the armored elite tasked with upholding feudal law and defense. Trained from early youth in martial skills, horsemanship, and weapon use, knights were not just fighters, but personifications of feudal ideals. Their loyalty was sealed through ceremonies of homage, where they knelt and swore lifelong service to their liege lords. While their actual behavior didn't always align with the ideal, the knightly code of chivalry provided a moral compass emphasizing courage, protection of the weak, and piety. Lords, the overseers of feudal estates, held both economic and judicial power. They managed agricultural productivity, settled local disputes, and administered their lands. However, they were also vassals, subordinate to higher-ranking nobles or the king, bound by solemn oaths of loyalty. This created a multi-layered chain of vassalage, where each relationship reinforced the next. The act of breaking one's oath, or violating fealty, was considered a serious betrayal capable of destabilizing the entire social framework. At the summit stood the monarch, a symbol of supreme authority, though often constrained by his dependence on loyal vassals. While the king technically held dominion over all land, his real influence was limited without the cooperation of lords who governed extensive territories in his name. A weak king might see his rule undermined by ambitious nobles, while a strong monarch could consolidate his realm and wield true control. Feudalism was not merely a means of survival, it also imposed structure. It offered a solution to the instability of early medieval Europe, creating an organized system of responsibilities. However, this same rigidity ultimately contributed to the system's unraveling. By the 14th century, dramatic shifts in demography, economy, and technology began to dismantle feudal ties. The Black Death ravaged Europe's population, creating severe labor shortages and empowering serfs to demand improved conditions or even emancipation. Commerce blossomed, and with the expansion of trade came the rise of towns and cities, shifting wealth away from rural estates. At the same time, the advent of gunpowder weaponry and the formation of professional armies reduced the military significance of knights, eroding one of feudalism's core elements. As central governments gained strength, kings gradually reclaimed power from feudal lords, paving the way for early modern nation-states. By the Renaissance, the feudal model had largely faded, replaced by market-driven economies, urban societies, and centralized administrations. Yet the echoes of feudalism endured. Its hierarchical framework shaped European governance and law for centuries. Concepts such as loyalty, obligation, and structured service left lasting impressions, still traceable in legal doctrines and cultural values. Feudalism was more than a social contract. It was a societal adaptation to the harsh realities of its time. It forged a network of reliance and cooperation that allowed civilization to persist through centuries of disarray. Though now a relic of the past, the feudal system reflects humanity's remarkable ability to organize and survive amidst chaos. Its legacy is deeply woven into the historical fabric of Europe, and its influence still offers valuable insights into the foundations of the modern Western world. Feudalism was a civilization built on duty, allegiance, and mutual survival, an enduring framework that gave shape and stability to the medieval age. The Crusades, a tapestry of zeal, power, and turmoil. The Crusades stand as a sweeping and chaotic chapter in medieval history, an epic saga fueled by spiritual devotion, political calculation, and personal desire. These holy wars, primarily waged between Christian forces from Europe and Muslim armies over the control of sacred sites, especially Jerusalem, were far from straightforward. Stretching from 1096 to the close of the 13th century, the Crusades were sparked by a volatile fusion of religious conviction, strategic interests, and the pursuit of glory. Their legacy endures through cultural exchange, commercial expansion, and deep-rooted hostilities that still echo today. This historical drama began in the 11th century, a period rife with both instability and opportunity. Europe was fragmented, riddled with internal conflicts, while the Islamic world, though occasionally divided, retained authority over Jerusalem, a city revered by Christians, Muslims, and Jews alike. It was against this complex backdrop that Pope Urban II issued a passionate appeal at the Council of Clermont in 1095. His call to arms ignited Europe, presenting the campaign as a sacred quest to reclaim holy Christian lands, with promises of spiritual absolution, even eternal salvation, for those who answered. The Pope's fiery plea united fractured factions under a singular purpose. Knights, nobles, and even peasants were swept up in a wave of fervor, bound together by the allure of purpose and divine reward. The First Crusade, launched in 1096, was both a shocking military success and a brutal revelation of the movement's harsh realities. Tens of thousands set out on a grueling march across continents, motivated by faith, wanderlust, and the hope of immortality. Their journey was plagued by hunger, illness, and constant struggle. Yet in 1099, they achieved the extraordinary, the conquest of Jerusalem. However, their victory was soaked in blood. Accounts from the time describe horrific massacres of Muslim and Jewish inhabitants, laying the foundation for centuries of religious hostility. To solidify their position, the Crusaders founded Christian outposts known as Crusader states. However, these footholds remained precarious and under constant threat. The initial triumph of the First Crusade proved hard to duplicate. In 1147, the Second Crusade was launched, following the Muslim recapture of Edessa, one of the key Crusader territories. Despite ample resources and widespread support, this campaign ended in disaster. Disjointed leadership, internal divisions among the European forces, and the strategic brilliance of Muslim defenders spelled failure, revealing the unpredictable nature of these religious conflicts. The Third Crusade, which began in 1189, brought forth some of the era's most iconic figures. It was sparked by the stunning recovery of Jerusalem by Saladin, a masterful Muslim leader who had successfully united vast portions of the Islamic world. Facing him were Europe's most formidable monarchs, including England's King Richard the Lionheart. The rivalry between Richard and Saladin became legendary, defined by monumental clashes and a begrudging mutual admiration. Though Richard achieved key victories, he ultimately failed to reclaim Jerusalem. A truce, finalized in 1192, allowed Christian pilgrims to enter the city while leaving it under Muslim administration, a bittersweet end to a campaign marked by valor and disappointment. The Fourth Crusade, which commenced in 1202, revealed how far the movement had drifted from its original religious goals. Though initially aimed at retaking Jerusalem, the Crusaders were redirected, lured by political schemes and financial burdens, to Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. In 1204, they infamously sacked the city, plundering its wealth and devastating a fellow Christian stronghold. This betrayal deepened the schism between Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox Christianity, and symbolized a complete departure from the original spiritual aims of the Crusades. Despite ultimately failing to secure permanent Christian dominance in the Holy Land, the Crusades left a profound and lasting impact. They helped open up new avenues of trade, linking Europe and the Middle East. Crusaders returned home with exotic goods, unfamiliar customs, and advanced knowledge, especially in medicine, mathematics, and astronomy that would later fuel the European Renaissance. Eastern spices, silks, and luxury items began flowing into European markets, transforming not only economies but lifestyles and worldviews. Yet, alongside cultural enrichment came deep wounds. The violence perpetrated in the name of religion entrenched deep-seated animosity between Christians and Muslims, an enmity that reverberated through the centuries. Jewish communities also suffered, often becoming targets of Crusader aggression on the way to the Holy Land. These episodes of brutality intensified anti-Semitic sentiments across Europe. Furthermore, the sack of Constantinople permanently fractured Christendom, creating theological and political divisions that persist to this day. The Crusades also reshaped the social and political fabric of Europe. Many feudal lords who embarked on these campaigns never returned, enabling monarchs to absorb their lands and consolidate royal authority. This laid the groundwork for stronger centralized kingdoms. The experience of commanding large armies and managing massive campaigns led to developments in military strategy and fortification techniques. Meanwhile, the cultural exchanges of the time enriched artistic expression, literature, and philosophical thought. In the end, the Crusades were far more than a religious confrontation. They were a vast tapestry of human desire and consequence. What began as a singular spiritual endeavor evolved into a complex series of campaigns, driven by belief, greed, rivalry, and desperation. The Crusades illustrate how ideas, both sacred and secular, can drive humanity to perform acts of extraordinary courage, as well as shocking cruelty. They reveal the dual nature of ideals, as forces for both inspiration and destruction. The legacy of the Crusades is not a straightforward story of right versus wrong. Instead, it is a mirror reflecting the vast range of human motives and outcomes. Through their victories and defeats, they expose the enduring complexity of our history and the eternal struggle between our noblest ambitions and our darkest instincts. Genghis Khan and the Mongol Empire: Conquest, Vision, and Legacy. The story of one of the greatest and most influential empires in history begins on the boundless, wind-swept plains of Mongolia. It is a narrative of endurance, ambition, and far-reaching vision, centered on a man who rose from obscurity to reshape the fate of continents. Born in 1162 as Temujin, this child of a fierce and unforgiving land would become Genghis Khan, the universal ruler, and the architect of an empire that stretched across Eurasia and altered the course of civilization. Temujin's early life was defined by hardship and struggle. After his father, a tribal leader, was poisoned by rivals, the young boy and his family were cast out, stripped of protection, abandoned, and left to fend for themselves. Alongside his mother, Hoelun, and his siblings, Temujin fought starvation and the constant threat of enemy tribes. These unforgiving circumstances forged a resilient spirit and instilled in him a profound sense of leadership, loyalty, and determination. From a young age, Temujin began to see beyond the traditional framework of kin-based politics. Unlike most leaders of his time who depended solely on bloodlines or tribal loyalty, he built a following based on merit, loyalty, and ability. Gradually, he attracted a band of steadfast followers, individuals drawn not by family ties but by shared ideals. This new vision allowed him to overcome generations of intertribal conflict and unite the often warring Mongol clans under a single banner. This unification was not simply a power grab, it marked a complete transformation in Mongol identity. No longer just rival clans roaming the steppes, the Mongols began to see themselves as a singular people, bound by destiny. By 1206, after years of fierce battles, calculated diplomacy, and strategic alliances, Temujin had achieved what once seemed impossible, the complete unification of the Mongol tribes. He was proclaimed Genghis Khan, universal ruler, and with this, the Mongol Empire was born. Genghis Khan's leadership was revolutionary. He restructured Mongol society, outlawed tribal feuding, and enforced a new legal code that rewarded merit and loyalty over noble birth. His army, once a collection of nomadic warriors, evolved into a disciplined, mobile, and formidable military force. On horseback, Mongol warriors could cover immense distances rapidly, allowing them to strike with shocking speed. Their skill in mounted archery, combined with detailed intelligence networks and psychological warfare tactics, including terrifying tales of destruction, made them nearly unstoppable. But Genghis Khan was not merely a warlord, he was also a shrewd and forward-thinking statesman. Though his campaigns were often marked by relentless brutality, his approach to governance was unexpectedly tolerant and pragmatic. He allowed conquered peoples to continue practicing their religions and frequently integrated local customs, officials, and knowledge into Mongol rule. For instance, after defeating the Khwarezmian Empire in Persia, he adopted elements of their sophisticated bureaucracy to better manage his growing territories. By the time of his death in 1227, Genghis Khan's empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea, encompassing large swaths of China, Central Asia, and beyond. His successors, including his grandsons Kublai and Hulagu, would extend Mongol control into Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and even further into Asia. Under their leadership, the Mongol Empire ushered in an extraordinary era of peace and connectivity, often referred to as the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol Peace. This unprecedented stability safeguarded vast trade routes, especially the Silk Road, enabling the exchange of goods, ideas, technologies, and even cultures on a massive scale. Luxuries like silk, spices, and precious stones flowed westward, while inventions such as printing, papermaking, and gunpowder made their way east. However, this vast network also unintentionally spread deadly diseases, including the Black Death, illustrating the profound and sometimes perilous interconnectedness of the world under Mongol influence. The Mongols' impact extended well beyond trade. In China, they established the Yuan dynasty, blending Mongol governance with Chinese traditions. In Persia, they rebuilt cities and promoted Islamic art and science. In Russia, their presence influenced administrative systems for centuries. Perhaps most remarkably, they fostered religious tolerance across their territories, allowing Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, and others to coexist with relative peace, an approach that was exceptionally rare during that era. Still, the legacy of the Mongols is deeply complex. Genghis Khan and his armies are remembered not only for their visionary leadership, but also for the widespread destruction they left in their wake. Entire cities were annihilated, and countless lives were lost in the process of conquest. The fear they inspired was matched only by the devastation they wrought, scars that would remain for generations. Over time, the immense empire began to fracture. The sheer scale of the territory, internal rivalries, and the difficulties of long-term governance led to its gradual decline. By the end of the 14th century, the Mongol Empire had splintered into separate khanates, each with its own challenges and identity, yet the legacy endured. Genghis Khan remains one of the most polarizing figures in history. To some, he is the embodiment of ruthless conquest and violence. To others, he is a visionary leader who transcended tribalism, fostered cross-cultural exchange, and established principles of meritocracy and religious freedom far ahead of his time. What he built was not merely an empire of lands, but an empire of connections, one that helped bridge East and West in ways that changed the world forever. His story, rising from the lonely steppes as an abandoned boy to the commander of the largest contiguous empire in human history, is a profound testament to what resilience, vision, and sheer determination can achieve. The Mongol Empire's legacy, both awe-inspiring and cautionary, continues to echo through history, shaping the world we inhabit today. Europe's awakening, the Renaissance and the rise of modern thought. The Renaissance, whose name means rebirth, was a dazzling and transformative era in European history, unfolding roughly between the 14th and 17th centuries. It signaled a sweeping cultural and intellectual revival as Europe emerged from the perceived gloom of the Middle Ages into a radiant age marked by exceptional artistic brilliance, groundbreaking scientific inquiry, and bold philosophical advancement. This pivotal period reimagined the realms of art, science, politics, and human perspective, setting the stage for the modern era and placing human beings at the very center of curiosity and innovation. This movement first took root in the lively and dynamic city-states of northern Italy, with Florence serving as its vital core. In the 1300s, Florence thrived not just as a commercial and trading powerhouse, but also as a hotbed of creativity and ambition. Wealthy merchant families, most famously the Medici, used their considerable resources to support artists, architects, and intellectuals. For them, artistic expression and scholarly pursuits were more than aesthetic or practical. They were powerful tools to immortalize their names and uplift their society. This widespread patronage cultivated an ideal environment for a cultural surge that would eventually influence the entire continent. At the heart of this cultural renewal was the rediscovery of ancient knowledge from Greece and Rome. Much of this classical wisdom had faded in Western Europe during the Middle Ages, but had been carefully preserved in Islamic centers and Byzantine libraries. As these ancient texts were reintroduced through trade, conquest, and scholarly exchange, they reignited a fascination with human nature, inquiry, and the physical world. Thinkers turned once again to the works of Plato, Aristotle, Virgil, and Cicero, drawing inspiration to explore the scope of human possibility and the mysteries of nature. This revival of classical thought gave birth to humanism, a philosophical outlook that celebrated reason, individual potential, and the intrinsic worth of human beings. Art, in particular, became the most powerful and visible expression of the Renaissance mindset. It moved away from the rigid and symbolic traditions of medieval art, embracing perspective, naturalism, and emotional depth. Visionaries like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael revolutionized visual expression, crafting masterpieces that revealed the intricate beauty of the human body and the soul. Michelangelo's statue of David, carved from a single block of marble, stood as a stunning symbol of human power and grace, while his frescoes on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel reimagined biblical stories with extraordinary splendor. Leonardo da Vinci, the quintessential Renaissance man, or Homo universalis, embodied the era's spirit. Not only a painter, he was also an inventor, scientist, and anatomist. His notebooks, brimming with futuristic inventions and anatomical sketches, show a relentless pursuit of knowledge, from how birds fly to how muscles work. His famous drawing, The Vitruvian Man, captured the Renaissance belief in the unity of science, art, and nature. But the Renaissance was far more than a rebirth of artistic expression. It was a daring scientific revolution. During this period, long-standing beliefs were tested, and new models of the universe took shape. Nicholas Copernicus challenged the geocentric view, asserting instead that the Earth revolved around the Sun, an idea that overturned centuries of accepted doctrine. Galileo Galilei, using his newly improved telescope, confirmed Copernicus's model and expanded humankind's grasp of the cosmos. Though condemned by religious authorities, these discoveries signaled a dramatic shift, a commitment to finding truth through observation and rational thought, rather than blind faith or tradition. Of all the innovations to emerge, none was more transformative than the printing press. Invented around 1440 by Johannes Gutenberg, this device forever changed the landscape of knowledge. Before its advent, books were laboriously copied by hand, making them scarce and expensive. The printing press made books accessible to many, enabling the spread of literature, science, and reformist thought across Europe. It fueled higher literacy rates, sparked intellectual debate, and accelerated the pace of innovation. Importantly, it amplified the voices of critics like Martin Luther, whose 95 Theses challenged the power of the Catholic Church and ignited the Protestant Reformation, which dramatically reshaped the religious fabric of Europe. At the core of the Renaissance was a profound transformation in worldview. While medieval thought had emphasized divine authority and the afterlife, Renaissance thinkers celebrated life in the present. Humanist scholars championed the study of history, literature, and ethics, proposing that understanding the human experience was just as valuable as seeking divine truth. Francesco Petrarch, often called the father of humanism, urged people to cultivate virtue and wisdom through self-reflection and engagement with classical texts. This shift in thinking was echoed in the arts, where portrayals of the human condition became more complex. From the ethereal grace of Raphael's Madonnas to the raw emotion of Michelangelo's Pietà. Though it began in Italy, the Renaissance soon spread across Europe, touching every region with its vibrant spirit. Its ideas influenced artists like Albrecht Dürer in Germany, playwrights like William Shakespeare in England, and architects such as Christopher Wren. Each region adapted Renaissance ideals in its own way, producing a diverse and rich cultural tapestry. In Northern Europe, artists merged meticulous detail with moral and religious themes, while writers like Shakespeare delved into the depths of human emotion and thought with unmatched brilliance. The Renaissance didn't end suddenly, rather it evolved, sowing the seeds for the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution. Its emphasis on individual reason, empirical evidence, and intellectual freedom laid the groundwork for modern democratic ideals, scientific methodology, and educational reform. The Renaissance helped shift the center of knowledge from religious dogma to human observation, fueling the secular and humanistic values that define Western culture today. Ultimately, the Renaissance was more than just a chapter in history. It was a celebration of humanity's limitless capacity for renewal and reinvention. It stands as a powerful reminder that even in times of uncertainty, creativity and curiosity can lead to extraordinary change. From its origins in the vibrant city-states of Italy to its influence across the European continent, the Renaissance continues to inspire. Its legacy is etched not only in the timeless works of marble and paint, but also in the very essence of modern thought, a tribute to the era when humanity rediscovered its potential and reimagined the world. Unveiling the world, the era of global discovery. The age of exploration, spanning from the 15th to the 17th centuries, marked a pivotal era in human history, one that drastically extended the boundaries of the known world. Fueled by ambition, curiosity, and the thirst for dominance, this period witnessed daring expeditions across previously uncharted seas. These ventures dramatically reshaped societies, economies, and global cultures, leaving behind a legacy as intricate as it is enduring. At the heart of this sweeping movement was Europe's drive for new trade routes. For generations, the Silk Road had served as the lifeline between Europe and the riches of Asia, transporting spices, silks, and other rare commodities. However, by the 15th century, the expansion of the Ottoman Empire had obstructed many of these vital land routes. This obstacle forced European nations to search for maritime alternatives, igniting a seafaring revolution that would alter the course of world events. Portugal, a small but ambitious coastal kingdom, took the initiative. Guided by Prince Henry the Navigator, who championed exploration, Portuguese sailors began to chart unfamiliar coastlines along Western Africa in hopes of accessing the Indian Ocean. In 1488, Bartolomeu Dias achieved a critical milestone by navigating around the Cape of Good Hope at Africa's southern tip. A decade later, Vasco da Gama completed the long-sought journey to India, solidifying Portugal's place as a dominant player in the lucrative spice trade. Meanwhile, Spain pursued a different strategy. The Italian mariner Christopher Columbus, believing he could reach Asia by sailing west across the Atlantic, won the backing of Spanish monarchs Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand. In 1492, Columbus set out and landed in the Bahamas, unaware that he had stumbled upon an entirely new continent. His voyage marked the beginning of a profound collision between Europe and the Americas, an encounter that would forever alter both worlds. The impact of Columbus's journey was both immense and often catastrophic. The Spanish conquistadors who followed, such as Hernán Cortés and Francisco Pizarro, overthrew powerful indigenous civilizations like the Aztec and Inca empires. These conquests enriched Spain but brought untold devastation to native peoples who suffered from violent conflict, enslavement, and the introduction of deadly diseases such as smallpox, which decimated entire populations. The success of these voyages was made possible through technological breakthroughs. The development of the caravel, a swift and maneuverable ship, allowed explorers to journey farther and more efficiently. Tools like the astrolabe and magnetic compass helped sailors determine their position and direction, dramatically reducing the risks of open sea navigation. Such innovations transformed oceans from daunting barriers into vital passageways, linking distant lands and cultures in unprecedented ways. One of the most far-reaching outcomes of this era was the Columbian Exchange, a vast and complex movement of plants, animals, people, and ideas between the Old World and the New. Crops such as potatoes, maize, and tomatoes, native to the Americas, became dietary staples across Europe, Africa, and Asia, revolutionizing agriculture and cuisine. In turn, Old World staples like wheat, sugarcane, and coffee, along with animals like horses and cattle, were introduced to the Americas, altering native ways of life. However, the Columbian Exchange also had a grim side. Diseases like smallpox, influenza, and measles, carried by European explorers, wreaked havoc on indigenous communities, causing one of history's greatest demographic collapses. As the thirst for exploration and territorial expansion grew, other European powers joined the race. Nations like England, France, and the Netherlands entered the fray. Though Spain and Portugal initially divided the world in 1494 through the Treaty of Tordesillas under papal guidance, this agreement could not contain the ambitions of rising competitors. By the 17th century, European nations were fiercely contesting control over trade routes, colonies, and natural resources, shaping a geopolitical landscape that continues to influence modern borders and global politics. The Age of Exploration also stimulated intellectual revolutions. As explorers encountered unfamiliar lands and peoples, they vastly expanded Europe's understanding of geography, biology, and anthropology. Maps became more accurate, curiosity about the natural world deepened, and these discoveries laid essential groundwork for the coming scientific revolution. Yet, the darker legacies of this era cannot be ignored. The exploitation and destruction of native societies, as well as the rise of the transatlantic slave trade, stand as harrowing reminders of exploration's human cost. European colonies demanded vast labor forces, giving rise to a brutal system that saw millions of Africans forcibly transported across the Atlantic in chains, a historical atrocity whose repercussions still echo today. The Age of Exploration was more than a period of geographical discovery. It was a time of profound global transformation. It forged connections between distant regions, established worldwide trade systems, and laid the foundations for cultural exchange on a planetary scale. Explorers expanded the limits of what was known, revealing a world far more vast and intertwined than once imagined. But such connectedness came with consequences. This was an age marked by brilliance and brutality, invention and oppression, wonder and conquest. It serves as a powerful reflection of the duality of human ambition, our boundless drive to discover and dominate, to innovate and exploit. The Age of Exploration remains a cautionary and inspirational chapter in our shared history, a story of humanity's insatiable urge to explore, and a testament to both our greatness and our shortcomings. Revolt of Faith. The rise of the Protestant Reformation. The Protestant Reformation stands as one of the most momentous upheavals in European history, a dramatic turning point that redefined religion, politics, and culture throughout the 16th century. What started as a theological dispute soon erupted into a revolution, challenging the vast authority of the Catholic Church and reshaping the structure of Western civilization. At its heart was a plea for religious reform, but its waves of influence touched every facet of society and laid the foundation for the modern age. For centuries, the Catholic Church served as the spiritual and political bedrock of Europe, exerting control over both monarchs and the masses. Yet by the early 1500s, deep fissures had formed in its once unshakable foundation. Many Europeans had grown disillusioned by what they perceived as widespread corruption within the Church. Clerics were often condemned for their extravagant wealth and indulgent lifestyles. Particularly controversial was the sale of indulgences, monetary payments in exchange for forgiveness of sins. To many believers, this practice symbolized the commercialization of salvation and cast doubt on the Church's moral and spiritual integrity. In this climate of discontent, Martin Luther, a German monk and professor of theology, emerged as a vocal critic. A deeply introspective man, Luther was haunted by questions about sin and the path to salvation. Through his study of the Bible, he arrived at a radical insight. Salvation was not earned through good deeds or bought with indulgences. It was granted by grace through faith alone. This core idea, known as sola fide, faith alone, became the cornerstone of his break from church doctrine. On October 31st, 1517, Luther made a bold and defining move. He nailed his 95 Theses to the door of the church in Wittenberg. This act served as a public protest against church abuses, especially the sale of indulgences. His theses questioned papal authority, rejected indulgences, and called for a return to Scripture as the ultimate spiritual guide. The recent invention of the printing press amplified Luther's ideas, enabling them to spread rapidly across Germany and beyond, igniting fierce theological debates and winning him a growing base of supporters. Central to Luther's message was the doctrine of sola scriptura, or scripture alone. He contended that the Bible, not the Pope or church tradition, was the highest authority on matters of faith. This revolutionary claim empowered individuals to interpret scripture for themselves, thereby challenging the long-standing hierarchical order of the church and encouraging personal spiritual exploration. While Luther's ideas resonated with many, they represented an existential threat to the Catholic establishment. His teachings undermined the Church's monopoly on spiritual authority, provoking swift retaliation. In 1521, Luther was summoned before the Diet of Worms, a council convened by Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, and commanded to recant his views. Luther refused, declaring, "Here I stand. I can do no other." Branded a heretic, he was excommunicated, but the movement he started had already gained irreversible momentum. What had begun as a theological conflict soon became a sweeping social and political revolution. Across Europe, secular rulers recognized in Luther's message an opportunity to assert independence from Rome. In the German states, numerous princes adopted Protestantism, not only for its religious principles, but also to seize church lands and consolidate power. This alliance between Protestant reformers and political leaders ensured the survival and expansion of the movement. However, the Reformation also unleashed a wave of violence and turmoil. The religious divide between Catholics and Protestants led to bloody conflicts that ravaged regions of Europe. One early example was the German Peasants' War, which was partially inspired by Reformation ideals. Tens of thousands of peasants rose up against feudal oppression, demanding social and economic justice. Although Luther initially sympathized with their cause, he ultimately denounced the revolt, and it was violently crushed. As Protestantism gained ground, the Catholic Church responded with its own internal reforms, known as the Counter-Reformation. The Council of Trent, 1545 to 1563, sought to address internal corruption, reaffirm traditional doctrines, and halt the Protestant advance. New religious orders such as the Jesuits emerged, focusing on education, missionary efforts, and defending Catholic orthodoxy with renewed vigor. The effects of the Reformation reached far beyond religious institutions. It fractured Europe's religious unity, giving rise to a complex landscape of Protestant and Catholic regions. The emphasis on reading the Bible for oneself led to a surge in literacy and education, encouraging the growth of schools and an explosion of printed materials. The power of the printing press became undeniable, showcasing how technological innovation could magnify ideas and challenge entrenched power. Culturally, the Reformation fostered individualism and personal accountability, values that would later influence the Enlightenment and the development of democratic thought. Its encouragement of questioning authority and pursuing truth resonated far beyond theological debates, helping to shape modern principles of freedom, human rights, and intellectual autonomy. The Protestant Reformation stands as one of the most transformative events in world history. It was an era marked by deep spiritual questioning, explosive conflict, and lasting cultural change. It challenged long-standing institutions, redefined the relationship between individuals and authority, and set the stage for a more pluralistic and dynamic Europe. In retrospect, the Reformation is a powerful reminder of how ideas, once set in motion, can ripple across time and continents. Martin Luther's defiant act in Wittenberg was not merely a protest against indulgences. It was a bold demand for genuine faith, an attack on institutional control, and a spark that ignited profound and lasting change that continues to shape the modern world. Unlocking the cosmos. The Scientific Revolution. The Scientific Revolution was one of the most transformative chapters in human history. Spanning from the 16th to the 18th century, it marked a dramatic change in how people perceived the universe and their role within it. This period broke away from centuries of dependence on religious doctrine and ancient authority, replacing it with a bold new method rooted in observation, experimentation, and the pursuit of evidence-based truth. In doing so, it redefined humanity's relationship with knowledge and set the stage for the rise of modern science. Before this intellectual awakening, most of Europe's understanding of nature was based on the teachings of ancient Greek philosophers and religious scripture. The geocentric model, a belief that Earth was at the center of the universe, had been accepted for generations. Promoted by Aristotle and later refined by Ptolemy, this view portrayed the cosmos as a perfect, harmonious system, with celestial bodies orbiting Earth in divine, unchanging circles. The Catholic Church embraced this model, placing humankind at the heart of creation, both literally and spiritually. It offered a comforting, orderly vision of the universe, but one that left little room for inquiry or dissent. Truth was considered timeless, best interpreted through the lens of established authorities. But winds of change were already stirring. The Renaissance had reignited interest in classical learning, encouraging scholars to question inherited wisdom. Translations of ancient texts, alongside the influence of the Islamic Golden Age, rekindled curiosity about the natural world. Slowly but steadily, minds began shifting from believing what was taught to asking what could be demonstrated. A major catalyst came in 1543, when Nicholas Copernicus, a Polish mathematician and astronomer, published De Revolutionibus Orbium Coelestium on the revolutions of the heavenly spheres. In it, he proposed a heliocentric model, a revolutionary idea that placed the sun, not the Earth, at the center of the universe, with planets, including Earth, orbiting it. This proposal challenged centuries of religious and scientific belief. Although Copernicus lacked sufficient observational proof to persuade many during his lifetime, his work paved the way for future astronomers to question the cosmos with fresh eyes. The next major leap came with Galileo Galilei, an Italian polymath who radically transformed how humans observe the skies. In 1609, Galileo built a telescope powerful enough to peer into space with unprecedented clarity. What he discovered was astonishing: moons orbiting Jupiter, which contradicted the belief that all celestial bodies circled Earth, phases of Venus, which validated the heliocentric theory, and a rugged cratered moon defying the long-held view of heavenly perfection. He published these findings in Sidereus Nuncius, Starry Messenger, a work that delivered a serious blow to the geocentric worldview and demonstrated the power of empirical observation. However, Galileo's breakthroughs came at a personal cost. His conclusions clashed with the doctrines of the Catholic Church, which regarded the Earth-centered universe as a theological cornerstone. In 1633, he was tried by the Inquisition, forced to recant his views, and spent the rest of his life under house arrest. Despite this, Galileo's courage and discoveries ignited a new generation of scientists, inspiring them to challenge authority and follow the evidence. One such figure was Johannes Kepler, a German mathematician and astronomer who expanded the revolution further. Drawing on the detailed planetary data collected by Tycho Brahe, Kepler formulated the laws of planetary motion. He demonstrated that planets travel in elliptical orbits, not perfect circles. This shattered the idea of a universe governed by divine geometric perfection and introduced a cosmos governed by precise, quantifiable laws. Kepler's work laid essential groundwork for understanding motion, gravity, and the mechanics of the heavens. The culmination of these intellectual efforts arrived with Isaac Newton. In 1687, he published Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy, a monumental text that unified the discoveries of previous thinkers into a single coherent framework. In it, Newton presented his three laws of motion and his theory of universal gravitation, the idea that the same force causing an apple to fall also governs the movement of planets around the sun. For the first time, the heavens and the earth were seen as parts of a single, interconnected system, ruled by universal laws expressible through mathematics. The impact of Newton's work was profound. His theories synthesized generations of scattered insights into a powerful vision of a mechanical, ordered universe, one governed by principles that could be discovered through reason and scientific investigation. His legacy established the foundations of modern physics and showcased the effectiveness of the scientific method, a disciplined approach relying on observation, hypothesis, experimentation, and analysis. But the influence of the scientific revolution went beyond the realm of science. It reshaped how humanity approached knowledge itself. No longer was truth something handed down by tradition or authority. It was something to be uncovered, tested, and refined. This intellectual liberation encouraged people to question, to experiment, and to explore, sparking innovations in medicine, engineering, chemistry, and many other fields. The printing press played a critical role in this transformation. Scientific books and journals became more widely available, allowing ideas to spread quickly and across borders. Scientists began to publish their findings, creating international networks of communication. Knowledge became more accessible, no longer reserved for elites. It was open to anyone curious enough to pursue it. The legacy of the scientific revolution is immense. It fueled the Enlightenment, set the stage for the Industrial Revolution, and continues to shape how we understand the world today. It revealed a cosmos governed not by mystical forces, but by laws that could be known, measured, and harnessed. It taught us to value evidence over assumption, logic over dogma, and progress over permanence. In many ways, the scientific revolution marked humanity's first true step into modernity. It redefined what it meant to seek truth and unveiled a universe more vast, intricate, and beautiful than anyone had imagined. Above all, it stands as a powerful testament to the strength of curiosity, the courage to question the unknown, and the extraordinary progress that follows when we dare to look beyond the visible horizon. The Enlightenment era, igniting the Age of Reason. The Enlightenment era, often called the Age of Enlightenment, marked a radical turning point in human thought and civilization. Stretching from the late 1600s to the late 1700s, it was a time when reason emerged as a guiding light, challenging long-held beliefs and transforming every aspect of society. This intellectual revolution questioned traditional authority and inspired sweeping changes in politics, philosophy, education, and science, laying the groundwork for modern democracy, human rights, and scientific advancement. It fundamentally altered the direction of Western civilization. The roots of the Enlightenment grew from the fertile intellectual landscape shaped by the scientific revolution. Pioneers like Isaac Newton and Galileo Galilei had shown that the universe was governed by natural laws, which could be uncovered through observation and reason. Inspired by these scientific breakthroughs, Enlightenment thinkers began applying the same rational principles to society, politics, and ethics. They believed that with the right use of logic and evidence, human beings could reform their institutions and improve the world, liberating themselves from superstition, oppression, and ignorance. At the heart of the Enlightenment was the belief that human reason was the most powerful tool for understanding reality and advancing civilization. This marked a major break from earlier eras, where divine authority and rigid traditions dictated the boundaries of truth. Enlightenment philosophers, known as philosophers, asserted that individuals should discover truth for themselves through critical thinking and empirical inquiry. This belief was empowering yet deeply controversial, as it directly challenged the power held by monarchies and the church. One of the earliest voices of this movement was René Descartes, often called the father of modern philosophy. His iconic statement, cogito ergo sum,
I think, therefore I am, placed human consciousness and thought at the core of existence. Descartes emphasized doubt and skepticism as essential tools for discovery, laying the foundation for a philosophy that valued individual inquiry over inherited belief. Equally influential was John Locke, whose revolutionary political theories would echo through history. In his two treatises of government, Locke argued that all people are born with natural rights, life, liberty, and property, and that governments derive their authority from the consent of the governed. These ideas directly opposed the divine right of kings and laid the intellectual foundation for both the American and French revolutions.
Another powerful voice was Voltaire, a brilliant writer and sharp-witted critic of religious intolerance and political tyranny. A fierce defender of civil liberties, Voltaire championed freedom of speech, religious tolerance, and individual rights. His famous statement, "I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it," captured the Enlightenment's deep commitment to free expression and open debate. Meanwhile, Montesquieu, another leading Enlightenment thinker, developed the idea of separation of powers in government. In his influential work, The Spirit of the Laws, he argued that political authority should be divided among legislative, executive, and judicial branches to prevent tyranny and protect individual freedom. His vision profoundly shaped the development of modern democratic systems, including the US Constitution. But the Enlightenment wasn't limited to philosophy and politics. It also transformed education and the dissemination of knowledge. Thinkers like Denis Diderot undertook massive efforts to compile and spread information. Diderot's monumental project, the Encyclopédie, aimed to gather all human knowledge and make it accessible to the general public. This embodied the Enlightenment's belief that education was the key to progress, and that knowledge should be shared, not hoarded. Yet, despite its lofty ideals, the Enlightenment had contradictions. Many Enlightenment thinkers failed to extend their advocacy of liberty and equality to women, enslaved people, and indigenous populations. For instance, while Jean-Jacques Rousseau promoted the idea of individual freedom and direct democracy, his views on women were regressive, confining them to traditional domestic roles. However, voices like Mary Wollstonecraft rose to challenge these limitations. In her groundbreaking work, A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, she argued for gender equality and the education of women, laying the foundation for modern feminist thought. The Enlightenment also wrestled with the tension between reason and emotion. While it celebrated logic and rationality as the paths to truth, it sometimes dismissed the importance of imagination, emotion, and spirituality. This imbalance eventually gave rise to Romanticism, a movement that sought to reintroduce the emotional and sublime into human understanding, creating a more holistic view of what it means to be human. The political consequences of Enlightenment thinking were nothing short of revolutionary. In America, the ideas of Locke, Montesquieu, and others shaped the Declaration of Independence and the US Constitution, establishing a new nation grounded in liberty, equality, and democratic governance. In France, Enlightenment ideals helped ignite the French Revolution, as the writings of Rousseau, Voltaire, and Diderot stirred demands for justice, accountability, and the rights of the people. These were not just political upheavals. They were the realization of Enlightenment ideals in action. They challenged centuries of absolute rule and signaled a new era where governments were expected to serve the people, not dominate them. The legacy of the Enlightenment is vast and enduring. It provided the intellectual framework for the modern world, influencing everything from human rights movements and democratic institutions to the rise of secularism and the continued advancement of science. Its core principles, reason, skepticism, and the pursuit of truth, continue to shape how societies confront challenges and envision progress. At the same time, The Enlightenment reminds us that progress is rarely perfect. While it broke barriers and inspired powerful transformations, it also exposed the limits of its own ideals. The contradictions of the era reflect humanity's ongoing effort to balance reason with compassion, freedom with responsibility, and progress with justice. At its heart, the Enlightenment was an act of intellectual courage, a bold challenge to the status quo, and a call to imagine a better world. Its legacy lives on in the democratic freedoms, scientific advancements, and social justice movements that define our age. And above all, it reminds us that the light of reason, once sparked, can guide generations toward greater knowledge, freedom, and human dignity.